And you're here live with us on the C major before the show episode, talking about 7 chords. I'm glad to be with you here on this Saturday afternoon. It's a beautiful, gorgeous day in the greater New York City area, and I debated on whether or not I should be here talking with you or if I should be outside enjoying the sunshine. So I decided to talk with you. So welcome to today's show. We're talking about 7 chords. And you're here with C Major Porter. And we've got a lot to cover. You know, I really wanted to give you a little bit more information first before just starting to play 7th chords. Maybe you know what they sound like already. Maybe you don't. I think you know a lot more about chords than you give yourself credit for. You probably have heard 7 chords a lot, especially if you listen to pop music, if you listen to jazz, if you listen to classical music. I think you would hear a lot of 7 chords and not even realize it. But I'm more interested in how you react to 7 chords. So if you can tell when you're hearing a 7th chord, what would be your response? How would you put 7 chords into your music making? We talked a lot about inversions last week. We talked about triads. We've been talking about triads pretty much up to this point. And so, in today's episode, we'll cover 7s, but I also want to give you some food for thought for next week as well. So, I'm going to jump right in with our books. So, if you've been following the syllabus, if you've been following the blog, and you can find us at cmajorporter.com, and pretty much everything on that first page is changing. It's being used as a blog, but we may set up a more formal blog in the future. I'm thinking about doing that because I don't want to lose your attention by just posting everything on our first page. We'll see what happens. But if you have your First Steps in Music Theory textbook, go ahead and open that up. We like to refer to this book because there's a really good discussion about inversions of triads. So the triads that were always in root position, we discussed those for a number of weeks, and then finally we decided to get into inversions. So if it makes you more comfortable, you can think about root position triads as also being called 5-3 triads. I don't know if you've heard that. If you write 5-3, you write the 5 on top and then the 3 underneath that. Looks like a fraction, except it doesn't have the dividing line. So don't say 5/3, just say 5-3. And so you call it 5-3 because the upper 2 notes are at intervals of a fifth and a third above the root. So if you know how to count intervals, something we haven't talked a whole lot about on this show. But if you take piano lessons, you should have that discussion with your teacher. So just envision that you have a C chord and you have a C, you have an E, you have a G. You can think of that C as being the bottom note if you play it. Especially if you play it with your right hand, then your thumb would probably be on that note. But you know, my experience with working with students that want to play chords, sometimes they would go ahead and just play the chord with fingers 2, 3, and 4 in that order, which is always surprising to me. But some of my students do it because they wear nail tips, and then they're trying to figure out the best way to play it with flat fingers and not playing on their firm fingertips as you might do if you're using the fingering 1, 3, and 5, for instance. So that's something to think about. So if you're looking in the book, it's in my book, I have page 115. You can follow that page number if you'd like. And it's just showing you the way that you can arrange triads so that the third or the fifth is on the bottom and not the root. So this is where our discussion of inversions of triads leaves off, because it's just rearranging what sits at the bottom, what sits at the top, for instance. And then the way it's illustrated here, if you just color in the root note, then you can see where it's moving. If it's moving to the middle, if it's moving to the top of your triad. So if the third is the lowest note, a triad is said to be in first inversion. If the fifth is the lowest note, then the triad is said to be in second inversion. And then we have other language we can use. A first inversion triad is also called a 6-3 triad, and you write it as 6/3 because these are the intervals above its lowest note. So if you count up, you'll count to 6. Or if you count to the second note, you'll count to 3. And that's the distance away from E. So if you make E your bottom note, for instance, then 6 steps away from E would be a C, right? If you just go E, F, G, A, B, C. And then 3 notes away from E would be G, right? If you just go E, F, and G. So I hope you follow that. I think in just thinking back in undergrad, a lot of students got really confused and their eyes just glazed over once they started to see 6-3 because they were trying to think, what does this mean? Or not listening closely enough, not having on their thinking caps, their listening ears, their light bulbs, and just thinking, okay, I'm not really following this. But just stay with us because you may see this if you pick up the resources that will explain it in this way. And it doesn't have to be hard to understand. I mean, it really is very simple, and it's plain, it's clear, it's just part of the rules. So if you open up your mind to it, you can follow what's going on. So a second inversion triad is a 6-4 triad, and again, has to do with distance. So you're talking about the distance from your root note, which is why it's called that. And then, you can go into a discussion about Roman numerals, which you won't do. But I think what I'll do, if you join us over at the C Major Radio Show a little bit later, I'll just talk in terms of how it's all positioned on the staff so you can see it there. So it's really, really warm outside. It's in the 80s. I can't believe it got up to 88 because when it started out this morning, it was in the 50s. Cool enough for the heater to be used if you were that cool in your space, wherever you are. But here we are, almost 90 degrees. So it's just really intriguing to see the weather change in the way that it did in terms of the temperature. So I'm trying to keep cool. I'm going to be drinking iced tea in between our talks here. We've just finished with one resource, and I'm going to go to another resource. But here's some music for you, and I'll be back in a moment. You're listening to C Major Before the Show. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I am back. I took my little iced tea break. And this time I brought the tea to the table, so I have it with me. And so I shouldn't have to get up to go get iced tea at least. But I'm going to move a little bit later. But you'll know when I'm going to be moving. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for waiting for me. And let's move into the next resource. So this one was the part 1 of the Guide to Music Theory book that I spoke about earlier in the broadcast when we started at the top of the year. We were trying to cater this program to parents. And I still want to do that because I still find that there are some parents that are curious enough to want to know what their children are doing at the piano to participate in music making themselves. And then you have some parents that are pretty much hands off, and they'll just say, okay, here's my child, you know what to do. You all know what to do. Let's do it, and then just inform me later of how it's going. And so you have that situation too. But I think I was calling it Piano for Parents. I think we'll rename it Chords for Parents going forward because I really still want to focus on parents that would be interested enough to learn about chords. It's nothing wrong with learning a little something about chords. So chords are identified in exactly the same way as triads. So a chord made up from the notes of a tonic triad is therefore a tonic chord. So I'm going to use that word tonic because with one of my young students recently, we're talking about tonic and dominant. We made a game out of it. He really enjoyed it. And so now he's really working to understand how to transpose to other keys. And so he's getting more comfortable with tonic and dominant in more than just one key. So that's good. Good for him. I'm going to be giving him a shout out a little bit later. And then there are ways to illustrate that. You know, if you're writing down music clearly, again, see us over at the C Major Radio Show. But, you know, the more elaborate chords I was talking about in today's description of today's episode was that you can use not only the third and the fifth from the root of a chord, but also the seventh. And if you're looking at how everything is arranged in terms of a scale, you can see that. So we've already said that a triad is the simplest type of chord. And the word chord, just so you know, does not have a very precise meaning. So some sources will define it as 3 or more notes sounded together, and some will even define it as 2 or more notes sounded together. So it really depends on the source. So don't be surprised if you see that wherever you are. If you pick up a source and you go, oh wait, it says it differently here. Just go with the one that has the most meaning to you. That's what I would say. And so learning how chords relate to each other is also very important. So we're going to be saying a little bit about that today too. So I'll try not to use too much elaborate language, But in some cases, you really can't avoid that. This is not really the most simple or the most easy conversation to have over cocktails or at a cocktail party or at some sort of social event, whether you're networking or building business relationships or whatever the case may be. But if it comes up, at least you can have that conversation. I like to say to my students, this should be really easy conversation if you understand what it's all doing, but it's not isolated conversation. So you wouldn't go to a party and say, hey, how are you doing? I hear things are going well. By the way, have you run into any triads lately? I don't think you would say that. But anyway, so seventh chords are what we're focusing on today. So if you have a chance, look at in the Guide to Music Theory, Part 1, that I've been speaking about. If you need more information about the book and how it appears and the author, just see me. I'll be able to give that to you. But just look it up. And I'm on page 61 in my version of this book. There seem to be other versions out there with different covers and so forth, but this is the one that I have. And then you may be interested in finding out what the chord notation looks like. How would you describe a seventh chord in letters, for instance? How would you describe a seventh chord in numbers? So I've said this before on the podcast. We talked about symbols that were used, Roman numerals, and they were designed for study purposes and not to be used in performance. But I do know some of my musician friends who use Roman numerals in performance, or they use shorthand ways of indicating chords. And it wasn't, and according to this source, it didn't arise out of the practical need of performers. I just paused there so you can really think about that. So, the concept of paper music and writing down, the information that you're playing and then trying to read from that information, a lot of performers just don't use that, or they don't have a need for that, or they don't believe in that. And so the music is always primary, and then writing it down seems to be secondary. But that's for another discussion. So it just said the first is the chord notation used in jazz and other forms of popular music. The second is much older, and then it talks about the figured bass. Oh, wait. Two shorthand ways of indicating chords did, I said did not, did, however, rise out of the practical needs of performers. Okay. But, you still have those attitudes where some people say, I don't need to write this down, and then some others just say, yeah, just use your ears. You don't need to write it down. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to articulate here. Okay. So if you have anything to add to this discussion, feel free to get in touch with us. We are open and free to discussions here on the podcast. We don't try to know everything, but we do try to know some things and to be accurate in those things. But there are many ways to explain something. And some of the teachers out there who are teaching online, I'm sure you have your easy way of explaining things. And so I invite you to have a conversation with us. We're all friends. Okay, let's move to our other source. Now, this would be part 2 of the Guide to Music Theory. And I'm bringing this to the table because I like the way that it described how you are moving away from triads and getting into more quote-unquote elaborate chords, because it was first explained, like I said, on page 61 of the first guide, the part 1. But here we are, and we're finally in part 2. And it's talking about extensions of the triad. So if you're talking about sevenths and ninths, think of them as an extension. So a triad, as we said, on any degree of the scale may be extended by the addition of a seventh from the root. So all you have to do is just count up. So the most common occurrence of this would be a seventh added to the dominant triad, forming the dominant seventh chord. And then the seventh chords and other degrees of the scale are collectively known as secondary sevenths. So like the dominant seventh, they take their individual names from the degrees of the scale in which they are based. So if you know anything about scales, just think about that. So write down that information if you don't have your book in front of you, or just play back this podcast at this spot. And then we're going to try to get a little bit better at signaling in the podcast when we're talking about certain things. So when you put your cursor over any particular part of the podcast, any part of the audio, you should be able to tell what we're talking about. So we'll try to get a little bit better at that. But this is mainly talking about the inversions and part writing and things like that. And then it's talking about progression. So we're not going to really get that much into that on this podcast, but we may decide to get more into that on the other podcast, on the sister podcast, the C Major Radio Show. So you can really go into a lot of discussions about, what's considered a sixth chord versus a seventh chord and so forth, and what ninths are. But the most common piano student, I would say, really doesn't talk about chords in this way. And even if you're playing, say, the music of Brahms or Grieg or Schubert, unless you've really done the analysis and you're thinking that way, and you're thinking about part rating, and you're thinking about how to perform the notes of the more elaborate chords, then that means you really are starting to think about the sound that you want to make at the piano. So some of my more advanced students and college level students are thinking in those ways. So let's just step away from that source really quickly. So I may have more to say about that again as we're over at the C Major Radio Show. Now, here's something for everyone. So if you happen to have the piano chord dictionary, open that up, because what I like about this is that they give you right away the contents, and they tell you, in this book, you will talk about keys, you will talk about relative minors, you will talk about chords, and then they list the chords. And then they give you a chord chart and a major scale chart, which is interesting, but that's what the publisher decided to do. And it's just a handy guide that shows you what you've been playing all along. So if you need something like that, it shows you the notation, it shows you fingering, it shows you keyboard diagrams for all the important chords used in, and this is interesting, modern popular music. I wonder what they're talking about there. Because if I look at the copyright date, let's see, what is that? It's in Roman numerals. And the copyright date was 19... Let's see. Let me make sure I have this right. I think that's 1992. So if that's the case, that would be in the 20th century, the original publishing date. So I wonder if anything has been published since then. So whatever you decide to call modern popular music and where that starts for you. So only the most practical position of each chord is shown. The position given is one that is generally best for use in playing accompaniments with the left hand. So that's so interesting, because even in classical music, you still will use the left hand. So I demonstrated that on last week's podcast episode, where I played some classical pieces. I think I played some classical pieces for you. Or at least I talked about it. That's what I was being asked to do. And let me just go ahead and turn to the part for C major, of course. C major. So in here, you can see, starting on page 18 of this book, they give you inversions. They give you C major. And the way they're saying it, if you accompany someone by playing C major in the bass as a C major triad, you would be playing it as an inversion. So you'll be playing it as G, being your root note, followed by C, followed by E. Okay, so now go to the next page. A little bit further down the page, actually. And then you'll see a seventh. So the way they pictured it here, you're playing a G, a B flat, a C, and an E. So G would be in the bass. And then they give you the fingering. So again, it's an inversion. So now you're playing a 4-note chord, which is a C 7th chord. And then, if you prefer, you can play a C major 7th chord. So they're giving you 3 different versions of 7th chords that you can use, and then you would just use the one that works for you. So if you're playing by a lead sheet, for instance, or if you do happen to be looking at some quote-unquote modern popular music, and then you see it's calling for you to play a C 7th chord, or C major 7th chord, or a C 7th with a flatted 5th. And what does that look like? It can look either two ways. With a flat 5, a flat sign in front of the number 5, or it could say C 7th and then in parentheses you see a -5, which means to lower the 5th. Or the 5th is flatted. Whereas when you played the C major 7th chord, the 5th was not flatted. Okay, so I hope that makes sense to you. Okay, now, if you go, and this is what I love about this book, is that now it's giving you alternative ways to play a 7th chord. So the whole discussion about leaving something out, you would see, okay, this is going to be a version of a C 7th chord, and it's 3 notes. And in this version of a 7th chord, we're going to leave out the 5th. So you can do that. You can choose to leave things out. And there are certain rules for that composers have used. But you can decide that. So pictured here, I'm seeing a B flat on the bottom, followed by a C, followed by an E. Okay, now take a look at the one below that. That's a C minor 7th chord. So I'll spell that out for you. G on the bottom, B flat, followed by C, followed by E flat. And then a C 7th with a raised 5th can be written as C7 sharp 5 or C7 and a plus sign in front of the 5, and the 5 is in parentheses. Now if you go to the next page, you're going to see a C DIM 7. You're like, what does dim mean? So that's an abbreviation for C diminished 7th, or it'll have a C and it looks like a little O or a 0 if you prefer to see it that way, and then the number 7. So we haven't talked about diminished chords. I don't think we have. I'll have to go back and look at some of my podcast notes and to see what I've listed. I might have covered it in the Piano for Parents series, which we're going to rename Chords for Parents. But I don't think I've covered it in this version, the Chords for All series. So we're going to keep Chords for All, because once you're a parent and you learn about chords, then I'm sure you want to share it with the rest of your family. And then we're going to have another version of this series and rename it for the people that I'm trying to reach with that series. So it's going to be fun. I also have some announcements about that too, what's coming up. So just stay tuned here to C major before the show. Okay, so C7 plus a flatted ninth. What in the world do you do with that? So before I tell you the notes for that, let me go ahead and finish what I was saying about diminished seventh. I know what it means, but I think you just really want to know how it sounds. So if you're somebody that's getting ready to play a gig and you say, tell me, what can I do to play a C diminished seventh? Let me see if I like that sound. So you'll put a G flat on the bottom, and then an A, followed by a C, followed by an E flat. And then the fingering, if you wish to use the fingering that's here, you see a 5, followed by 4, followed by 2, followed by 1. That's the fingering. Okay, now go to a C7 plus a flatted ninth. And there are two ways to see that too. Thank you. I didn't know you were going to applaud for me. That's an applause for you. So thank you so much for staying with us here on C Major Before the Show. We're glad you're here. So if you see a C7 plus a flatted ninth, then you will see it. It looks like a little B in front of the 9. Or if the 9 is in parentheses, then it has a minus sign in front of it. Okay, then you have a C major 7th with an added ninth. So the C7 plus a flatted ninth would be G, B flat, D flat, E. And then the C major 7th with an added ninth would be C, B, D, E. And then you go into ninth chords, which we will not do. Yeah, I decided to cut that short. I mean, I think I may mention ninths just to say, okay, we mentioned ninths. But let's stay with sevenths if we can. Okay, so now let's put this resource away. And let me just take a little sip of my tea. I'm not going to leave you. Staying right here. It's really good tea. Iced tea. Okay, now what I want to have you bring out, and we did list this on our website. So if you saw us over at Music Glue / C Major Porter, you should be able to find us over there. Now that one does have a blog. I suppose I could build that blog over there. But I was trying to keep it separate from where we are with our classroom information, which I post on social media. Okay, so we introduced to you a pocket manual. Now anybody can have one of these. There are several out there. This is not the most recent one, but it is certainly one that we like to use here on the podcast. And so the reason why I wanted to bring this up, because it came up today. And it was so funny because I just read something about this. Somebody was talking about introducing chords and the way they were going to do it. And then, lo and behold, I ran into a young student who told me that her father was teaching her this way and this way. So I think it's a very popular way to learn chords. So let me just... type in a little information here first. I'm doing a search. Okay, so in this pocket manual of musical terms, if you care to take a look at it, it gives you over 5,000 definitions of key, musical terms, styles, forms, and musical instruments. And it gives you the biographies of over 1,000 composers and performers in all musical styles. It covers classical, it covers jazz, it covers pop, it covers world music. And it easily fits in the pocket, in a purse, or a musical instrument case. So it's been in print for a very long time. So if you happen to have it, I have the 5th edition. So something we really haven't talked a whole lot about, but you've heard me mention it. We've briefly mentioned keys, and I really didn't want to get into keys. But some of my students really want to know more about keys. And so I'll either turn them on to some information where they can find information about keys, or we just go along with the method and just learn about keys gradually. But if you need to fast track your learning, there's a way to do that. And it seems that the way to do that is by using a circle where you can see a table of major keys. Or you can come up with your own table. But a key, just so you know, is considered, according to this book, this manual, a key is a scale employed harmonically, that is, employed to form chords and successions of chords. So on the key note C, or any other note, 2 different species of scale or key may be built up. Some people say species, I say species. Okay, so C major, for instance, consider the scale for C major, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Now consider the scale for C minor. In this case, it's pictured as C, D, E flat, F, G, A flat, B, C. Such a scale or key is called major when its 3rd and 6th are major intervals. Let me read that again. Such a key or scale is called major when its 3rd and 6th are major intervals. It is minor, M-I-N-O-R, when its 3rd and 6th are minor intervals. So I hope that makes sense. And they just gave you the one example because there are several types of minor. So we won't go into that because then you'll think, oh boy. But just talk with your music teacher, and the music teacher should be able to tell you what's going on with the discussion of minor. The succession of intervals in every major key is the same as that in C major, in every minor key, as in C minor. To adjust the intervals properly, chromatic signs are employed. So I'm looking at this table, and they call it a table, but it really is a circle. So this is getting to where my conversation came up with this young student who says, my dad is teaching me. And then the mom jumped in and said, yes, my husband is teaching her to play the piano using this circle. So I'm going to talk more about the circle and what that all means. I am not going to leave you for very long. I've been sipping a lot of tea. So I'm just going to take a break here, just a couple of minutes, and I'll be right back. You're listening to C Major Before the Show. you're here on C Major Before the Show, thank you so much for tuning in. I am back. I just took just a couple of minutes. And so we are talking about the circle. I put that on pause because I know you really want to hear about the circle that I'm talking about. So here it says table of major keys. So if you go around this table, you should be able to find out how to go in order of key signature, and just by passing around the circle in either direction, really. And so let me just turn the page here. So it just says it will be seen on passing around the circle in either direction that the keynotes of the successive keys always follow each other at the interval of a perfect fifth. Hence the drum roll, circle of keys, keep rolling the drum, ending where it began is called the, wait for it, the circle of fifths. I knew you would be excited about that. You've been waiting a long time. You've been waiting a long time for me to say that. I know. This is the first time in this podcast series that I've said circle of fifths, and I'm not even sure if I've said it in the other series, but it was necessary. It came up today in conversation with just a young student whose parents are well aware of the way she's learning, and she's learning to play by chords first on the piano, and she's thinking about studying with me, so I'm very excited about that, and I'm going to be giving some shout outs shortly, so just stay with me. But if you're talking about chords, then you know a chord is formed by a succession of or from 3 to 5 different tones built up in intervals of thirds. You can use the word diatonic thirds from a given tone or a root. So a 3-tone chord, write this down. Write it down in your memory. Text it to someone. Write it on your social media. The word of the day. Wednesday wisdom. Tuesday thoughts. However it is that you do your social media. A 3-tone chord is a triad. A 4-tone chord is a 7th chord, chord of the 7th. A 5-tone chord is a 9th chord, chord of the 9th. So I will mention 9th chord in that regard, just so you can know the order. But this is going to be your homework. So I rarely tell you what your homework is going to be ahead of time. But I'm just going to follow up to make sure you did it. So this is your homework. So your homework for this week is to text someone what a chord is, and to describe in that text what a 3-tone chord is, what a 4-tone chord is, and what a 5-tone chord is. So you wanted to describe what a 7th chord is not. A 7th chord is not a triad. A 7th chord is not a 9th chord. And so, again, if you need to go over the information for yourself in writing and reading it, then let us know. We can get you the copy of the resource or the title of the copy of the resource and look it up for yourself, so you can say, okay, this is what C major was talking about. So, 9th chords, there's a picture of that in this book, and then inversions of a triad, which we talked about last week. Inversions of a 7th chord is what we're talking about this week. So not only 7th chords, I'm going to talk with you about inverting those too, just briefly, and then substituting. So let's say, for instance, you were playing a song that used, well, the song is in the key of C, first of all. So it starts with a C chord, ends with a C chord, and it goes C, C, F, C, 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 G, G, C, C, F, C, C, G, C. So those are your changes, right? Or you can think in terms of Roman numerals if you like. But where would you put a 7th chord in the place of one of those triads? So C, C, F, C, 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 G. Would it be there? Or would it be on the 2nd G when you do a repeat? So we'll demonstrate a little bit of that in a few moments. So I have some shout outs to give, and then I'm going to demonstrate that, and then I'm going to come back down and then end today's podcast with you. And I'm so glad you're able to be with me today. Let me just take another sip of tea. Really good tea. And so if you want to know more about the inversions of triads, like what the first inversion of a triad is called, what the second inversion of a triad is called, you can look these things up. So it's just a matter of 6, 6, 4, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. You know, if that language, if those ways of writing things down really excite you, then I invite you to explore that further. Okay, so I'm going to go to my piano in a moment, but first I want to give some shout outs. I haven't done that in a while. And so we're going to hold the applause today and just give one big applause at the end of everybody that I'm mentioning. But it's summertime, basically. And even though we haven't had the solstice yet, that's going to be taking place this coming week. So next week, if you happen to be in New York, just know that a lot of people are going to be celebrating that. There are opportunities to make yourself known in that arena, and you can be a part of the celebrations of that. But the shout-out started with, let me just go to that one student who is working really, really hard at understanding tonic and dominant. So I'm very proud of him because he's come a long way. I think his whole goal in life, being so young, is just to do everything fast. So we're talking about ways to do that, really getting him interested in his technique and his artistry. And he told me this week, I'm not interested in artistry. I'm like, well, you will be one day. He said, well, I'm interested in playing fast. I said, okay, that's why we are studying technique and artistry. Because while you're learning to play fast and to gain speed, then you also want to keep in mind of how you're going to express yourself musically and how the artistry plays a role in that. So he's opening himself up to that. And so I'm very proud of his progress, and I want to give him a shout out. And then I have another student who has decided to take his music making seriously enough to upgrade his instrument so that he can start to practice some of the Hanon exercises, and he wants to learn all 60 of them. And I'm aware that some people don't agree with Hanon, but for the ones that do, you know that there's a description at the front of the book about how you're supposed to approach those 60 exercises. But he has it in his mind to really do it and is looking forward to his college prep for becoming a music education student. And that's his goal. So shout out to him. Shout out to one of my other students who has also decided to take music seriously enough to learn some really, really advanced pieces. So I didn't know she was going to go that route, but she has the support and the push of her parents to do that. And so we're hoping to get her on the right road for that. And even though she's going to be studying other things, she really has surprised me with her whole courage to really study this level of pieces. So we're still working on and we're hoping to increase her dexterity and work on her tone and just her whole understanding of phrasing and articulation, all of that, because this was somebody that I inherited, but I've been very fortunate to have a chance to work with her. So I'm very proud of her progress. Also, I want to mention one of my students who is taking a break for the summer, who is really, really good at improvisation. So he is deciding whether or not he wants to continue or if he's going to go a different route with a different instrument. But I was just able to get him to the next level of method book. And so I wanted to give him a shout out because he received his certificate this week. And so I'm very proud of his progress. It's been a journey, I would say, for this student, because when we first started together, there were no expectations in place, and now I think there's starting to be some expectations that are starting to emerge, let's say it that way. And so basically I want to shout out those students. I know it's somebody that I'm leaving out right now, but I'll get to them next week. I haven't written any shout outs down today. I haven't written down anything. I'm just going off the top of my head, but those are the ones that are coming to mind. And so a big shout out to those students. Thank you so much. It takes a lot of courage to do what they've done. And so we just want to acknowledge the students and what they're doing. Okay, what I'm going to do now is, and just stay with me, I'm turning up the music because when I come back to this location, the music will be playing. But I'm going to step away from my music, take a sip of my tea, and then I'm going to go to a different location where a piano is waiting for me so I can play some of these seventh chords that I've been talking about and just see what we get, see what we come up with. So just stay with me. You're here with C major on C major before the show. It's a beautiful Saturday afternoon, and enjoy it because tomorrow the rain is coming. At least that's what I hear and from what I see. So here we are in the piano location. I hope you can hear that. There we go. Let's put some light on here. So since we did mention jazz, in this location I like to keep my little trusty Blues and Jazz Complete textbook here. And so if you look in the contents, you can't help but see something about seventh chords. So let's just see what they're saying. So let's go to, see, where do they first mention sevenths? I'm going to start with major sevenths in this book on page 52. This book is out of print, I believe. So if you're looking for it, I don't think you'll find it. But okay. And just so you know, in the history of the podcast, we have gone over the beautiful sound of major seventh chords. But before I do that, let's just go with C. C minor, C, okay, and then C seventh, okay, and then C minor seventh. Okay, that's as far as I'm going to go today. Okay, so, it's a little hard to hear what sevenths sound like when they're in isolation, and it's a little hard to hear how they might be used. Plus, I'm playing all four notes of the seventh chord. I'm not leaving anything out, and I'm playing with both hands. So it may be a little unfair to ask you to say, okay, what is this? But that's the way we learned how to hear chords in our A training class back in college. I've said that before on this podcast. That's what our teachers would do, or our teacher. And then when I go back to, now this is just, now it's funny, they don't really teach you about seventh chords on this page, but this is all about seventh chords. So I have a seventh chord here, C seventh chord, and then I have F seventh chord, and then a C seventh chord, going back and forth, an F7 to a C7. Then I go to a G7 chord, then an F7, and then to a C. And then there's a really nice application for using 7 chords, and they use it with a 12-bar blues progression. Okay, but here they're talking about major 7th chords. So a major 7th chord is created by adding the 7th step of the scale related to a given chord. Many times the performer may choose to omit the 5th from the 7th chords. Feel free to omit the 5th when working through the remainder of this book. So in this book, that's what they're advising you to do. But you have a C major 7 chord. So here, that sounds very different from what I was playing. And it sounds... And you remember me telling you the story about how I composed a whole entire piece of nothing but major 7 chords because I liked the sound of it. And then went to class and my professor just destroyed my piece. You know, embarrassed me in front of the whole class and said, that makes no sense. But here we are. And here's a piece that's constructed of nothing but major 7 chords. So there you go. So a warm-up progression would be a C major 7 going to an F major 7, going to an E major 7, going to a D flat major 7, going to a C major 7. So I like the way this book describes it. It says the major 7, and it may be abbreviated as MAJ7, as a lush sound. Get the feel and sound of a variety of major 7ths by playing, and then it has the name of this piece, and just playing it as a slow ballad style. So, okay, let's see what we do here. So this is the first time for this, so I'm just playing the chords. Now, if you prefer, we can go with an electric piano sound if you like more that sound. And normally I would have been using GarageBand so I can get the piano sound that I want, but I'm not doing that today. I'm just going with the sounds that are in the piano itself. As recall, somebody sending me I don't know if it was a survey, but it was just really a question of what type of piano I'm using and when I teach. And so I just answered the survey. I said, look, this is just what I'm using. Thanks for asking. And so there's a melody. You can make up your own melody. I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going to use the melody that they use. But I would say just try to, play around with the sound of 7s, okay? And using this progression. Okay, so I'll just call out the progression. C major 7 going to an F major 7, going to a C major 7, followed by a B flat major 7, going to an E flat major 7, going to a D flat major 7, and then ending with a C major 7. Now, my curiosity is piqued. I'm thinking, what would this sound like if I just played it as a non-major 7th chord, just as regular 7th chord? So listen to this. Something like that, right? Okay. So it sounds much nicer. So my question to you is, do you like the lush sound? And do you like it on a piano? Would you prefer to use a different instrument? Or would you prefer to play those chords in the right hand as opposed to the left hand? And so this book goes further, talking about the beautiful sound of major 7th chords, saying jazz and pop music is often created on chord combinations that move only a step apart from each other. The chords, and then they name the chords, and then just show you the use of major 7th chords increases the beauty of that progression. So would you agree that major 7th chords are beautiful, first of all, in the first place? Okay, and then there's a database that you can use to access the 7 chords. So let me know what your thoughts are about 7 chords. And then I like how this book takes you on a journey to playing major 7 chords in the right hand, creating a right hand melody for major 7 chords. It just says, play and repeat each major 7 chord sequence very slowly. Not fast, slowly. Stopping between chords. Rest for a moment and get your hand set. Then play the next sequence, continuing throughout all keys. It's important to do that. So if you want a little bit of history, talking about popular music, a fixture of popular music in the 1940s, believe it or not, and the 1950s, Nat King Cole played with a light, sensitive touch and was one of the first pianists to use comping in the left hand. So if you care to, maybe pull up a video on YouTube of Nat King Cole comping and using his left hand, and just see what type of 7 chords he uses. And then, of course, there are other ways to practice your 7 chords. So I just wanted to play an example of some 7 chords today. In this case, it happened to be major 7 chords, but I would love to know what you think. So don't forget to do some searching on your own, finding out the sounds that you appreciate, and also don't be surprised if I post something from a gig that I recently attended where there was like a minute sample of the musicians playing, because I had a chance to hear some of my musician friends playing this week. They were playing a Latin jazz live set, and I wanted to play just a 1-minute example of that, just so you can hear, listen for some 7th chords. Now, here's another blues progression, and it's in G. And there's some talk about voicings. Okay, so let me just play this example for you. Okay, so the 3 basic 7th chords used in a G blues progression are, so you have a G7 chord followed by a C7 chord and then followed by a D7 chord. Okay, so if you care to, use the Roman numerals 1-7, 4-7, and then 5-7. You can just say it that way. Okay. And if it bothers you to play in the bass like that, just move it up. I have some students that are flute players, and they don't like playing in the bass at all. Okay, but let's go here. So you can revoice your 7th chords that may allow for a smoother and easier movement between the chords. I'll let you decide how you want to do that. So, for instance, if you start playing around with the voicing, we talked about that, you leave some things out. So let's just hear what it sounds like to play the full chord, and then think about what it would sound like if you left some of the notes of the chord out and just played by thirds and sevenths and thirds. Okay, so here we go. And everything, by the way, is okay. Let me try that again. So I'm going to play it over here, and I'm going to slow it down so you can hear it. So I'm playing a G7 chord, full chord voicing now. It's revoiced as a C7 chord, so you should be able to hear that sound more like a cluster. Now see, G7 chord. Okay, now I'm going to move to a D7 chord, also what they call revoiced. C7 revoiced again, and then G7, and full chord voicing, meaning in root position. Okay, now let's see what it sounds if I play it with the flatted 7th of the G7 chord in the bass with a third above it. So let's hear what that sounds like. Okay, so. Okay, so I played it as slowly as I possibly could play it, because when you practice, they want you to practice the full chord and the interval voicings slowly until you actually memorize it. So if you're playing jazz and blues, a lot of things really need to be memorized. So it's not just classical music that requires memorization, if you can. Also, for some further inspiration, listen to the young students that were playing, or the young pianists, I should say, that were playing really, really, really well in the Clyburn competition, which I understand takes place every 4 years. So if you have a chance, pull that up on YouTube. We did post one video over at C Major Before the Show on Facebook. And so it was just really thrilling to see some of the talent that was there. Really touching, really, to see some of the talent that was there. But have fun with 7th chords this week. I hope you do. So I'm going to talk to you as I change my location. We're going to go back to where we were with our music playing on the recording. And then I'm going to say goodbye to you and tell you what we're going to be doing next week. So thank you so much for being here on this beautiful Saturday afternoon with us on C Major Before the Show. We're so happy you were able to be with us, and we invite you to come back next week because I want to talk with you further about some things you can do with chords. I have a young student, again, who is very young, just starting out, but he wants to know everything he can do with his music making already. So he's picking up sheet music that's very advanced for him and trying to figure out what to do with it. So a lot of it has to do with chords at this point because he's just discovered that he's really, really good at playing triads. So now, because of who he is and how he learns, he's looking to see if he can find C chords in everything. So he's not only looking at pop music that shows you the chord changes along with the guitar fingering changes, he wants to know, are there any C chords in this? So everything from rock songs to Billy Joel songs, he's just looking at it all. But we came across something where he thought he was seeing 2 different chords, and it was divided by a slash. So I think for next week's episode, I believe I should talk with you about what that slash means. And then I'll give you the way that we're going to talk about it and the way we're going to name next week's episode. We will be talking about the slash. So if you know anything about slash chords, join us next week right here on C Major Before the Show. It's been a great pleasure to be with you. I hope you learned something today. We were talking about 7th chords. That was today's topic. Join us over at the C Major Radio Show. We will continue this discussion of 7th chords over there, and it's going to be starting today. I'm trying to figure out our summer schedule, but I want to keep everything together as closely as possible for the summer. Don't spread it out too much because you want to have some summer fun. If you're like me, you want to spend some time in the sun, maybe some time in the water even, as it gets warmer and warmer, and have some summer fun. And if you can, have the podcast with you in your back pocket or with your device or your app. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Music or whatever podcast you subscribe to, we would love to be with you as you're playing this podcast and learning something about music and music making as you go across the summer. It's a great time to practice chords. Why not spend your summer with making music using chords on the piano? We'll see you next week right here on C Major Before the Show. Have a great evening, and I'll see you over at the C Major Radio Show next. Thank you for listening.